Yeah, so just to start, let's say before we get into the main body of the thing, I just want to do a little sort of introduction, orientation about Wild Pop, because we are doing this under that name. So, for close to a year, myself, Will, and Charlie Brownlee, who is another, is from Newcastle as well, and who hasn't been able to make it today. The three of us have been working on a research group called Wild Pop. And a large part of the project is a commitment to facilitating independent public forums that place, I guess, what traditionally might be understood as academic discourses or academic practices outside of academia. So hosting music and art workshops and events, tapping into certain DIY frameworks of sharing work and community making. In April of this year, we hosted the Wild Pop Symposium, which was 4 events across 2 days in Newcastle and Gateshead. On the Friday morning, I did an Instagram post to say something along the lines of things get started tonight. But as part of that post, with it being a sort of inaugural event of sorts, I also wrote a little bit about the ideas behind Wild Pop itself. So that on the right there, right, okay, yeah. So it says, regarding this image that we're using for promo, of weeds growing out of cracks in the concrete, there's something there about the idea of popular music and art making is fertile, critical and discursive spaces, with things emerging from beneath the surface, and the desire to pay attention to the cracks and the weeds is valuable in and of themselves. I think the wild pop, in a lot of ways, might be less about radicalness and more about a feeling of fertility. So, less a sort of radical manifesto or whatever, but instead thinking about the value of paying attention to the world as it exists, and consideration of the latent, so sometimes overlooked, potential present in discussions of music and art making. And to me, a certain feeling of fertility is encouraged and engendered by the ongoingness of contemporary cultural activity and the stream of material to be constantly reckoned with. So, as well as multiple examples of what seems an increasingly sophisticated critical engagement with that material. So for example, discussions of popular music and its politics by writers like Aisha Siddiqui, on the bottom left, who I'll mention a little bit later. Artist and writer Hannah Black, in particular, a piece like an art forum essay on the Black Panther Marvel movie. The New York Times Still Processing, which is a podcast, who do weekly sort of depth insights on emerging trends in pop culture, the art criticism of someone with a white view, or the countless insights given away for free. Yeah, or I can just hand this one because we're just. So the white view, we're just in the bottom right. Or the countless insights given away for free on Twitter. So, for example, the writer Megan Garvey, who in this tweet out just screenshots saying, "Introduce my old man homes at the bar to future. They said this is blues music." So that's, in my mind, that's an essay in and of itself. So with Wild Pop, by letting it engage with contemporary modes of engagement, and by retaining the healthy suspicion of the ability of old discursive models to adequately articulate emerging cultural dynamics, we're letting it contribute to the ongoingness of critical discourse, which itself can sometimes feel distinct in a lot of ways to a lot of traditional academia. So, again, we're interested in recognising and hopefully articulating specific tensions and dynamics as they exist within practices of music and art making. So in the case of this presentation, we're going to get onto, this manifests in a consideration of the ways in which contemporary pop music might exist outside of and perhaps actively undermine many traditional and widely acknowledged paradigms of music making, with attention paid to a particular lineage of DJ culture, first emerging in New York in the 1970s. In other instances, Wild Pop in the past, Wild Pop's hosted participatory workshops with members of the public, inviting them to conceive of music making beyond the often restrictive and exclusionary rhetoric of professionalism. As mentioned, we hosted a two-day symposium within which we curated and commissioned a program of video essays to be screened in one of our daytime slots, in which artists and researchers found inventive and hopefully engaging ways to articulate ideas about the culture surrounding them. This example too had something to do with seeing contemporary modes of communication as fertile spaces for, in and of themselves, for expanding criticism and the way one thinks about criticism. And as well, we also run a regular night called Feeling Your Thoughts, which bring together performance, video, and live music sets, where we look to share work by a certain established paradigm of the gig night, but while simultaneously maintaining a marked decentralization of music itself. Sorry, I've been a little bit thrown by my PowerPoint, but yeah, so as a collective of practicing musicians and artists, as Wild Pop, hosting events that share the work of others, and sometimes ourselves, the members of Wild Pop are actively involved and invested in a world we're critiquing and discussing, which I think is important. This idea that the artist is the critic and vice versa. So that's sort of orientation of sorts regarding the work that we're doing as a research group. I guess it's appropriately brief, but it hopefully gives an impression of where we're coming from and the way we are approaching things. So before going on, so I'm just going to set this up a little bit before I hand over to Will. So one of the starting points for the presentation, I think, came from working with students at Newcastle. And having a sense that the language they have at hand when talking or writing about the music they make, the music they love, or the music that they have to write about in assignments, etc., that language often feels ill-equipped to readily express what might be good or engaging or bad or off-putting about the work in question. Of course, some people are more adept at articulating these things than others, but the sort of problem that we're identifying doesn't feel reducible to just that alone. So, in the submitted abstract for today, we phrased that sort of thing that starting point in terms of quote, a timely recognition that the majority of commercial popular music exists increasingly outside and beyond conventional notated paradigms in a way that is yet to be sufficiently embraced or absorbed by academic music research, pedagogy, or the wider community. And that I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Craig. So, yeah, I guess the rest of this, the rest of the content for our presentation today will be versions of, and sometimes perhaps slightly entangled versions of, ways of trying to negotiate, talking about what we are loosely calling at the moment wild pop. And hopefully people will get an idea of what we're talking about. We're talking about something we know very well as practitioners, and as Craig was saying, in terms of having to try and develop new ways to talk about music, especially in a university context with students who are either writing about music or making it. So I'm going to just throw in a slight curveball here with the video clip, and it's from Tusk Festival last year. Do I just press spacebar for that, or? Yeah, that'll work. It's from Tusk Festival last year. Tusk is, our biggest experimental music festival in Newcastle. It happens the second weekend of October. I recommend it to anybody here to go along. This is an artist called Klein, who is from South London, and her set last year was particularly arresting. I think it'll just work now. I don't think it sounds anything. There's about a 2-minute clip of this, just to give you a slight code. So it was very interesting to hear Anders's talk before, having to negotiate ways to talk about the sampling and the looping elements of the repetitiousness of what are contemporary music, 85% in the most recent Billboard chart. And that's partly what we're trying to do as well, and it was interesting to hear Anders having to grapple with that kind of language and find a way to articulate it. I'm going to go in now on a bunch of stuff that is trying to negotiate that from various different historical and critical perspectives, and hopefully it'll make sense somewhere along the line. So our abstract included the term post-Mancuso, which isn't necessarily generally a recognised term, and for that sake, for the sake of the abstract, we use it as for conciseness, but actually it's an interrogated term. And when I came back to the abstract to start writing the paper proper, I was thinking, well, actually, we got away with something there because nobody picked up on that necessarily. Not that they would, but I'm going to explain it now. So what do we mean by that term post-Mancuso? Is it a term that we use in the abstract without having necessarily read it or heard it elsewhere, expecting people to know what we mean? Well, it's a pretty loose term, I guess, but what it's meant to denote in the moment is a moment in the early 70s where David Mancuso's parties in the original Prince Street loft in the lower-end neighbourhood of Lower Manhattan, once known as Hell's Kitchen. That moment, which is a moment in the broadest sense, i.e. not a single event, is defined by a shift in how music is performed, heard and enjoyed by a single individual, in the first instance, Mancuso himself, wanting to share the enjoyment of that with a room full of invited guests who, by extension, would thereby have a great time together listening to and mostly dancing to that music together. So I'm being very verbose about just describing the beginning of club-based dance culture, I guess. What that moment then represents is a consolidation and concentration of trends and tendencies that have been evolving over the previous 25 years or so, where people increasingly found ways to listen to records collectively as a social alternative to needing to attend and or dance to a performance of live musicians. Of course, Bill Brewster and Frank Borden's last night a DJ said my life is as good as any historical overview of that historical evolution. I'd like this to dislodge from what I'm trying to articulate here the presence of the fabled DJ, because in terms of what we're talking about here, for our purposes here, the DJ is kind of an irrelevance. In some highly normatised context, the role of a professional DJ still exists, obviously, but in that regard, to the way the music functions between people, it's no longer a factor in shaping how directing the flows of cultural intersubjectivity. The figure of the DJ is such a distorted one in the midst of dance culture's progress since the 1970s, while the various house-related club booms and the late 80s and early 90s and 2000s have yielded an idea of the DJ as some kind of super outsider demagogue, something like that. What I'm really interested in tracing here is a musical relationship between people that has nothing to do with any separation of roles per se. The quasi-utopian socio-political purpose of the early loft parties that Mancuso was organising was always an integral part of what he wanted. The quasi-utopian element was always an integral part for him, Mancuso himself. Everything was geared towards dismantling the mechanisms of market exploitation that tend to pervade any cultural accumulation around social interactions. A recent homage to this appeared in David Simon and George Pelecanos' HBO TV series, The Deuce, which seeks to bring to the screen the complex web of cultural intersections that defined early 70s New York. A little bit like peeking behind the curtains of the backdrop to Travis Bickle's Torment in Taxi Driver, I guess. I'm actually going to show, there's the Deuce there, I'm actually going to show another 2-minute clip of that exact moment, because it's such a bizarre thing that suddenly drops into the TV programme. There's no trumpeting of it, nobody tells you that it's Mancuso's loft, nothing's mentioned in any credits afterwards, but for anybody that knows the story, they immediately see that it's a very deliberate reconstruction of that exact moment.
Seems like I can afford my own rent.
She's okay.
Jeez, $3 just go dancing there over here?
No booze, no liquor license, no rates, and no leftovers.
No problem.
Sweetheart, some things are more important than the bottom line.
How well you could tell there, but I wanted to leave it to the end of that part of the clip so that you'd see that they even took the trouble to cast somebody that would look exactly like David Mancuso. And I expect if you zoomed in on that shot, they'd probably even make sure that it was Booker T and the Energy's Melting Pot that was on the record label. So someone in the team that was putting that program together wanted to create a loving homage to the beginning of disco, essentially. So hence, by the way, I normally don't have facial hair. I'm just worried about people thinking that I've got a kind of Mancuso complex. I'm trying to develop an image for myself, but I'll shave in the next couple of days. Hence, post-Mancuso rather than post-disco. Mancuso was the progenitor for disco, but it was never really part of the movement as such, although he was clear from his first serious party in 1966 that the purpose was hardcore dancing. Mancuso himself was aware that he was aware of this distinction early on. As he related to Tim Lawrence in Legislative Today, which is Lawrence's excellent account of disco, named after Mancuso's first event in 1970, Legislative Day, which is referenced obviously in that quote as well, in that clip. No way did I want to be a disc jockey, he says. I only did it because... Oh yeah, okay. Oh yeah, we've got the quotes, great. Okay. No way did I want to be a disc jockey, he says. I only did it because I used to hang out with these people all the time, so I knew what kind of music they liked. Lawrence continues, in Mancuso's terms, a third ear had started to beat. Thanks, Craig. I just kind of lost the PowerPoint control there, but if you don't mind, that's really hard. Cheers, thanks. Teamwork. A third ear had started to beat, directing the path of both the music selector and the crowd according to sonic trajectories that had acquired a supernatural momentum. As Mancuso elaborates, there was neither the DJ nor the dancer. Someone would approach me and play the record, and I would already have it in my hand, or would already be on the turntable. We would look at each other in recognition. It got very psychic because we knew we were following a sonic trail. He goes on, it didn't happen right away, it took time, but it happened. The experience was enlightening. Om is the source of all sound. It's a Buddhist chant where voices gel together and vibrate. And I felt as though we returned Om. It was very childlike, very peaceful, very liberating. It seemed to be correct. It reflected what I thought the world was supposed to be about. That's a sentence I like particularly. Everybody was there, and we were like a family. There didn't seem to be any conflicts. Music helped us reach that place. Music was the key to get back home. Mancuso's third ear was that narrow, fertile space that seems to exist between outsider experimentation and popular demand, consciously wresting back the latter from any standardised corporate business model. He forged, and that's significant for this wild pop element, this narrow space, so that's where I'm going to focus most of what I'm going to talk about, and Craig as well. He forged a situation where people came together without any binding conditions, facilitating a commonly felt impulse, nothing more complicated than dancing. Well, being, for those who attended, a simple way to have a really good time, it became, to the rest of humanity in history, I like to overblow things, a message, a statement about what was possible and what was important about being alive. Beyond any utopian readings one might try and apply to these events, what I really want to draw out for them is the way in which they affected the music itself and music's subsequent evolution. The early love parties set in motion a disintegration of the music itself, which became purely listening matter, where listening refers at once to the dancers, the audience, the public, the performer, insofar as one can delineate the selector record player's role as a distinct performance. Performance here is entirely impossible without the dancers and that third ear, and the music itself, if one considers music as a fluid, ethereal entity that speaks to itself from instance to instance, from performance to performance, from station to station. This capacity for music to be its own reflexive dialogue through the medium of human relationships was always actually a factor. It's what 18th century counterpoint is, after all. But until the revolution instigated, and I'd like to leave that germ of 18th century counterpoint in there, just sort of hanging in the air, but until the revolution instigated by Mancuso's love parties, it hadn't become the decisive defining factor of what music was to become beyond European notated pseudo-orthodoxies. Mancuso's third ear proposes a space that is intentionally fugitive in the manner that Fred Moten posits in Black and Blur, the first of his new trilogy, Consent Not to Be a Human Being. The third part came out about 2 weeks ago, I think, while also pointing out its contrapuntal dynamic, the fugue in Fugitive. I'm going to close these two quotes from Black and Blur and before I pass on to Craig, and then I'll pick it up later on. So this is from Moten. The audience is liberated by having been compelled to listen. Only the spellbound are capable of flight. Moreover, the listener, having entered the fugue state, is inhabited by the artist, which is to say, by the artist's position as opposed to her personality, which remains hidden, absent. Earlier on in Black and Blur, Moten provides a theoretical context for just such a consumer-producer dynamic to emerge. The theory and practice of revolution is bound to the way the individual emerges as a theoretical possibility and phenomenological actuality in and out of the revolutionary ensemble, operating in a translinguistic Antillian harmonic unison, a communism of the occult interstices of the market in the cut outside of the market relations and market aesthetics, which means paying attention to the thing, to the commodity that screams its fetish character and the whole of its secret against the deafness of the proper. So the definition of the proper is a kind of backdrop I want to leave there for my second bit after Craig now takes over with the listener performer analysis.
Yes. Yes, that Fred Norton bit is really dense to follow, isn't it? But yeah, I want to, for myself, I want to go back to David Mancuso again. I want to build this. I'm thinking about the space of listener and performers. So yes, there's an interview with Frank Orton and Bill Brewster in 1999, which was reprinted by Red Bull Music Academy the day after David Mancuso's death, where Mancuso is quoted as saying, 2016. So Mancuso is quoted as saying, "When the disc jockey got 2 turntables and was in a club using recorded music, a new menu was started because the dancer was part of the performance. You'd have your live musicians where you'd have to go someplace and listen to them play, or your home where you'd sit on your couch and listen to records. Well, the disc jockeys got in between this and created something new, where the dancer became part of the whole setting of the music being played. That was the difference. You have one foot on the dance floor and one in the booth. But that was where the disc jockey was able to create this whole new format between the performance and the listener." So the thing I want to draw attention to is the way that Mancuso points towards a certain collapsing space between experiential registers, between experiencing musicians live and listening to records at home. And as well, the phenomenon of the dancer and the DJ is representing a certain between, what I'm calling here, betweenness of the categories of listener and performer, which I guess is taken further in some of those quotes that were referred to with the third year, where those two categories are subsumed to this bigger thing. So, so while I'd be hesitant to be too overt or romantic, I think it is possible to understand Mancuso in the Loft as a moment in which alternate spaces of value in relation to popular music practices are uncovered or articulated beyond a largely restricted listener-performer or consumer-producer binary, a binary that is weighted and or hierarchical too. One of the ways that's done in the Mancuso example, not least, is by placing an emphasis on community and collectivity, and also tapping into a certain politics of pleasure, of having a good time. So, in relation to the framing I gave us earlier, I think this moment agitates the language or categories of pop music. This moment agitates the language or categories of pop music one quite often inherits. And by simply just existing beyond the remit of those parameters, is able to gently subvert them and provide new discursive territory. So, while on the one hand, and this is a simple observation, on the other, it feels actually foundational in a lot of ways in identifying the way in which I think we actually interact with the world around us. It identifies the shortcomings of the language we often fall back on, and perhaps drawing attention to the politics of its usage. So I wrote that, and I wasn't quite sure if that got the point, what I was trying to say across, so I just got another sentence, another bit where I try and say that again. So what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the perspectives that we might inherit or assume are informed by rigid categories that also represent the power dynamic. So be that listener, performer, audience, artist, consumer, producer, or like passive and active, or passive or active, and drawing attention to. So I want to, so the thing I'm thinking is drawing attention to experiences which complicate or destabilize those positions, as I think Mancuso does when describing that DJ and the dancer. But that might actually be crucial in more readily expressing what it means to interact with the world around you. So I'm spending time on this here, I'm coming back to this, as I had a sense that there's something in that sentiment of betweenness that feels increasingly relevant today. I would suggest that similar complications emerge when thinking about the internet and social media, where tensions between traditional understandings of consumer or producer are increasingly slippery and problematized. And as well, I do think it's important to acknowledge the internet and social media as the cultural backdrop against which the majority of contemporary commercial popular music finds expression. So one of the things that I've been interested in my PhD and many other research is considering the way in which contemporary experience, particularly online and on social media, might be understood to take place within a felt double bind, where moments of intimacy, connectivity, and democratic expression are inescapably compromised by the platforms on which they're hosted. And cautious of being drawn into a simplistic narrative around millennial narcissism and or political short-sightedness, I'm interested in thinking about the experience of this double bind as a critical language worthy of attention in and of itself. So it feels a basic observation to say that Twitter or Instagram or online spaces in which users simultaneously consume and produce content, but it is true, and the prevalence of those platforms, I think, does ultimately represent a discernible shift beyond the cultural logics of previous generations, broadly speaking. So a shift from sort of passive reception to widespread production of culture. And again, this is sort of a basic first-person reading in a lot of ways, but again, it sort of doesn't mean it's not true. So, of course, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram are all corporations, they're all ad-supported, etc., and all the material posted on them is ultimately subsumed to those corporate interests. It's often said that one way to think about social media users is as an unpaid labour force, generating content and economic value for these big corporations. So the essay by Doreen St. Felix, for example, titled "Black Teens Operating the Internet and Seeing None of the Profits," its title alone might get into the heart of the matter. Aisha Siddiqui, who I mentioned previously, in a lecture at the Walker Art Centre in 2015, observes the way in which, by making ourselves public on social media, we are, quote, at ever-increasing rates, teaching corporations to be more efficient at advertising to us, inviting them to take even more detailed, essentially, snapshots of the ways in which people are making their community and mimic those patterns in order to better advertise to us. But as well, in that same lecture, Aisha Siddiqui also observes that quote, the people that have almost the greatest investment in these spaces and spend a great deal of time on them are people that the rest of the world isn't that friendly to. And it was initially a space to escape daily hostilities and aggressions, and of course, for people of colour, people who aren't straight, queer, gay, LGBTQ communities, these are really vital developments. Our ability to produce an established community, or our ability to connect, the way it's been facilitated for the social web has in fact changed many lives. So, while the internet and social media is terrible in a lot of ways, it feels disingenuous to overlook the reality that these spaces are important and political sites of, in a lot of ways, radical connectivity. And I'm trying to be brief, obviously, with that, that's a much bigger thing, but so let me just simply say that I see that this is one of those crucial double binds of contemporary cultural experience. So my point here, I guess, is that a contemporary situation is slippery in such a way that makes rigidly held subject positions less and less tenable. And the betweenness that I'm identifying within that cited Mancuso interview seems to align with that feeling of a double bind, of a paradoxical experience between two poles, which themselves may or may not be worth holding on to. So, operating in this cultural context then, it's difficult to situate contemporary music makers as only one side of any potential listener, performer, consumer, producer divide. artists operate within the same moment and on the same platforms as their audiences and as everyone else. But I wonder if this, in fact, might be a way to think about a framework of value in relation to contemporary popular music. So my feeling is that artists like Klein, who Will started with, might be part of a collective experience with which I identify. And I think that is a big part of what interests me about a lot of contemporary popular music. But before going on, it's probably worth giving a handful of examples of what I mean by contemporary pop music. Because that's, just saying that doesn't necessarily, that can mean lots of things to different people. So Klein, first up is one, or Charlie XCX, or Mitski, or Sophie, or Dean Blunt, and I might just play a little bit of a little example. So I'll play just a minute or so of a song by Sophie. So when creating something, while also negotiating or making sense of the material information one is exposed to, as well as the sort of squashed history one has access to, I think music makers are increasingly inseparable from an ongoing cultural discourse to which we all contribute, and which, as such, represents a certain feeling of equivalence or transparency between artist and audience, a certain sense that we're all in this together, if that doesn't sound too trite. So those who consume and produce culture are one and the same, and part of the engagingness of those artists cited comes from their singular response to a contemporary cultural moment with all of its complications and contradictions. So I'm trying to suggest that the presence of an underlying sense of collectivity, or something, or at least something approaching that, one which, situated against the cultural shifts of Web 2.0, might be distinct from that of previous generations. So I think a lot about the shows on online radio station NTS, which is based in Hackney, but also broadcasting from Manchester, Los Angeles and Shanghai, which in and of itself feels like an emerging sort of institution of popular music culture. Many of the regular NTS hosts are not DJs in any traditional or professional sense, but instead come together to represent what the ICA describes as a family of like-minded and passionate individuals, who I think have established themselves through sharing music and contributing to something beyond their own 1 or 2 hour shows. Similarly, I think it feels increasingly common for music and art events to include DJs between acts, with people looking for ways to be inventive and programming, with inventive programming and furnishing a collective experience. And finally, I just wanted to say that even if an artist, so I'm carving out this sense of collectivity between audiences and artists, but without, and I'm aware of that coming across as naive, so I would just want to say that even if an artist is elevated above the audience, be that on stage or by success or visibility, again, in a sense, undermines a certain equivalence or collectivity I'm gesturing towards. I would argue that any such elevation is not necessarily reducible to any top-down hierarchical separation. At the very least, I think in DIY spaces, there seems to be a shift in value in individuals committing to performance, in making themselves visible, presenting and owning the work they've created, and even actually leaning into the persona and performance of celebrity, for lack of a better word, particularly when stepping outside the rhetoric of whiteness and thinking about the representation of voices, communities, and experiences that have been historically and continually overlooked and repressed. So, I did say that at the very least in DIY spaces, because despite these things becoming more slippery as we get considered more commercially successful artists with bigger platforms, some of the best examples of the power of representation via an individual's elevation actually probably do exist in those spaces. So what Beyoncé signifies to black women, and particularly black women from the southern states of the US, destabilizes predictable criticisms of the artist's politics as undermined by their proximity to capital. It might even begin to invert that criticism as it feels important to recognise and problematic to discount the way such a prominent figure, a black woman no less, innately speaks to and connects with a section of society who've been historically marginalised and overlooked. The political philosopher and popular music scholar Robin James, reflecting on reactions to the surprise release of Beyoncé's Formation video, did this string of tweets. So I put together they read, "Do the Beyoncé so capitalist gripes discount the political character of a black woman's pleasure in response to Formation? Like, I'm just thinking of the overwhelming outpouring of sheer glee on Saturday and Sunday. That was a thing. Or why not view that huge and intense response as a political thing?" Yeah, and I just sort of wanted to leave that in the air, I guess.
Okay, so as I said at the beginning, this is about trying to articulate a bunch of stuff, and I'm aware that we've really tried to pack in a heck of a lot of things here, but just let me say that this has been our attempt to really narrow it down. So I'm just going to come right back in with the definition of the proper thing, and just try and quickly summarise things in a way that is directly applied to actual music practice. It has to do with the claim that we had in our abstract saying that looking beyond musical paradigms derived from European classical tradition, which academic research and pedagogy are often disinclined to relinquish. When I read that to a senior colleague, they were a little bit indignant, and they came back with saying, this is actually an email, while there are clearly strong conservative tendencies within musicology, I feel that the picture being promoted here would have been more true in the early 90s. Really, things have moved on so much since then, and the picture is so much more nuanced and complex. And I agree with that, colleague, but above all, what I'm concerned with seeing is how far one went to completely bypass the frameworks of European classical traditions entirely. So in terms of what Greg was saying about producer-consumer, I'm also going to take a slightly more flippant angle on that, which is that sampling technology, and this is something people don't actually say directly enough, which is that sampling technology means that anybody can do anything, and anybody can do it. I did a lecture last year for the first time ever, deliberately obtuse, and it was called Music is a Piece of Piss. And that was really a challenge to the students to say, well, how are you actually going to make something that people want to listen to if it's so easy? And of course, there is a huge complex background to that. For me, the heart of the Wild Pop project is a desire to negotiate emerging musical practice that is marked by two entangled imperatives: a material response to what people want and a desire to seek and grasp beyond what is given and voiced in institution. I'm aware of some of the examples here might seem rather left field and avant-gardist, but I would argue that in many ways they're a lot more commercial than what we call commercial music, insofar as they're not backed and promoted by, okay, 2 minutes, thank you. They're not backed and promoted by corporate power, but they're still getting people to turn out and pay for their gigs on the merit of what the music sounds like. So we've managed to sort of overrun a bit here. I'm going to summarise really what I was going to say about sampling. The main thing I wanted to actually illustrate in a technical term, and I can very quickly summarise this, was going back to jungle being a moment in the early 90s where people really started for the first time to use sampling keyboards in a completely anti-European classical way, in the sense that they would just play keyboards at random pitches without bothering whether they would be in time with each other and that kind of thing. And that is, to me, that's the best example I can find of a trend that begins very quietly and slowly and ends now, or comes to a point now with Klein. And I'm going to finish with Klein because we started with her. I'll summarise quickly some of the slides. It doesn't matter. I was just quickly going to, okay, so there was my roll call as well. I'll just finish with this. And here, what you're going to hear is, if we'd had more time, I'm going to play the 4 Hero example, Burning. But I'm just going to finish with this, which is Climb. And you can hear that ethos of anybody can do it being applied, but she's creating stuff that people are actually paying for. And obviously, most recently, she's a regular supporter of Björk, who's begun to champion her work. So, not to be overlooked, I would suggest, if you have that information. Say one more thing, because we've had a few examples of her doing that keyboard thing, and I've seen her play a few times now, and she's not using a music keyboard anymore, she's just doing the thing you can do with a QWERTY keyboard, which is just to randomly find pictures. In other words, responding to what it sounds like directly. One thing I'll just quickly summarise that I was going to go into a bit more detail about was that I'm also arguing here that there's now a second generation or a third generation of sampling artists that no longer feel the need to legitimate the technology by making it according to, like for instance, some of the stuff that Anders was showing us, making it fit to a conventional musical model. So the 4 Hero example and many others are now completely disregarding any kind of resemblance to a conventional musical model.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.